If we get cut off, that's why. I just have to change it. It's not that I don't have the money, but I'll change it. I just got a notification.
Oh, that's funny. Well, we can always use mine, but it'll work. It'll work for today. We'll be good.
So Mark, can you tell us how you titled today?
That would be a good question to ask. Don't start me with that. That's so unfair because I usually title these things after they're done.
Right. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the emotional and physical side of, basically your if we narrowed it down to what happens with your bound nature and free nature states.
Yep.
And if I had to start this, this is what I have learned, and we've talked about it briefly. So when we look at, and let me just lead up to this, when we look at whether we are introverted and extroverted, I have commented that I don't truly believe now that the personality traits we have or how we stipulate introversion and extroversion is true. And what I mean by that is I believe it is an energy in versus an energy out state in how we recover. And because of that, we have certain things that serve us, certain things that don't serve us, but we also have things that we do or we like to do, but they are energy in versus energy out. And you could like to do, for instance, you could like to exercise, but because you know it's healthy for you and you like to do it, but it takes a lot of energy for you to go do it. And I don't mean like physical, I mean the mental, emotional side of exercise, okay? So like I like to exercise, I like how I feel after, I don't hurt, but for me it's a very energy out thing. So it's not something I could do at any point in the day and just go do. Like I have to plan it, I just have to go do it, and I've learned to enjoy it, enjoy the time, but there was always a purpose to it, right? If I look at my former introverted self, and that was someone who didn't like to be in crowds, someone who could only like to talk to a few people. If I worked all week and then went out Friday night, Saturday night, I would be destroyed Sunday and a wreck for the rest of the week. And as I learned, this emotional energy in versus energy out, or how I recover, really is I need to retreat within to feel better, right? How I recover my emotional energy that I give out on that way. Some people, like extroverts, they like being around people all the time. They get energized, their energy tank fills up from doing that. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but sometimes when we look at the things that we do in our day that are in our emotional state, they certainly affect our physical state, right? Because the energy recovery, that energy in versus energy out, really has to do with our emotional state in our brain. And we've chatted about how the narrative in our head affects our physiology. Well, we've talked about the threat bucket. Well, if my energy out is talking to people and it's not an energy in, my threat bucket in a way gets full a little bit, right? I still enjoy doing it, but it gets full a little bit. And so I have to bleed it out a little bit. So I have to retreat within for my emotional re-regulation, so to speak. Doesn't mean I can't go out, doesn't mean I can't do those things, but maybe I need to know where I'm going ahead of time. Maybe I need to plan a little better my days or my days leading up to it. So when I look at the emotional state in our physiology state, sometimes I like starting with the energy in versus the energy out effect of different parts of our life, right? So for some people that work all day at a desk and type, right, and they're just in their own zone, and they're all encompassed to self. Well, on the weekend, they may need an energy out, or to recover their energy in, they need to go out and be around people because they've sat all day. So there can actually be a sort of a switch depending on your job, how you work, versus what you need because you didn't get. There are a lot of nuances to this energy in, energy out, or emotional and physical state that we can play with a little bit here as we chat about this. and get a little bit of a dialogue going to help you understand what serves you best, right? What serves you to be able to handle the day-to-day things we need to do for life, but handle the physiology of ourselves, so that we like to do the things we do and work on ourselves. So it's a healthy self-fulfilling prophecy in the whole encompass of your day, your life, your work life, and you. Any thought on that, Margaret? I mean, that's my spiel to start, but.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I was interested in this topic is because I think our emotional state is, the narrative and the emotional state go hand in hand. We've been talking about learn your language, and part of learning your language isn't just the words that you say, it's how you physically feel, it's how you emotionally feel, it's also learning your behaviors. And I feel like we've done a lot of talking on learning your language, but what does that mean at a deeper level? So that's part of what I wanted to get into as well, is just, what are emotions? How are they impacting us? How are they impacting our behaviors? How are they impacting, the language that we say to ourselves? And, Chris talked about introverted and being extroverted, this energy in. Or are you drawing energy from the external world in, or are you drawing it from your internal world out? And I would even like to state that there's probably even a driver beyond that. Why do people draw energy in from the outside, and why do other people need to bring it from within? What's going on there? That's maybe another conversation for another day. But I would even say that there's a layer beyond that. Because we've talked about this as well. There is this it's about turning into yourself, right? And learning how to bring what's inside of you out. So at some point, we all need to learn how to, if you're an extrovert, again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's an ebb and flow, a give and take always. And that's a beautiful thing. But at some point, the externals aren't going to be there to supply you, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So how do you learn how to tap into what's inside of you? Because that will never leave you. That will always be with you. So even if you're a self-proclaimed Class A president of the extroverted club, I still want to encourage you to learn how to draw from within, because that's a skill that will serve you your whole life. And it'll always be there for you when those externals aren't there. So I don't know, where did you want to take it? I wanted to just talk on things like, how do you, what are some of your emotional responses? Where do you find you get triggered? Where are those places in your life where you maybe, we're talking about bound nature stuff here, where maybe you've been a little irrational, or your emotional response is disproportionate to the situation at hand? Or why is it that there are two people experiencing the exact same thing, and one person is experiencing it one way, maybe negative, what we would call negatively, and one person is experiencing it positively? So those are some things I'd love to dig into today as we go on, but I'll give it back to Chris to.
Yeah, so I think as we get into those things on the deeper issue, what I think is, if we have to look at the genesis of why we get to that state. And when we look at coaching people, and we look at learning our language and doing those type of things, what we have to do is we have to go who we are. We have to learn ourselves, right? We have to have self-awareness. And then we have to look at all the way on the other end, the rebalance, right? The balance of self, okay? And that rebalance of self, no matter where we are in that continuum of what we're learning, we have to start with understanding ourselves first, right? So let me give you an example. If you are someone where you are more of a yang personality, you're a little bit more out there, or you're a great example would be like an alpha male, okay? And that alpha male has a lot of hard driving traits to their personality. Well, that person, to rebalance themselves in a day, or to get the most activity out of them, they need to learn how to self-regulate and balance themselves out first. So if that alpha male went to work at a very high energy office and there's a lot of stuff coming at them constantly, and their outward personality is continuing to outwardly put that, the balance of their energy in and energy out is completely off because it's all energy out, right? So their threat bucket in their head starts overflowing, right? Because there's no energy in for them. An energy in aspect would be they're probably more apt to do better work in a quiet environment where there's no energy, almost like they wake up in the morning before their kids get up, before they even go to work. It's darker, right? And they can focus because that yang personality and that yin aspect, or the energy in versus energy out, it's almost balancing itself. But if they go to work and they don't learn themselves, and that emotional state that they take, they keep getting heightened and heightened and heightened. So they get to those states where they react out. They get to those states where their physiology overreacts. They get to that state where they are hard driving and they can never come down. And it always comes back to learning of themselves. The opposite can be true. If you're someone that's more yin dominant, right? A little more calm, a little more easier demeanor. If that person got up in the morning and tried to work when it's quiet and dark, they probably wouldn't be able to focus as much because their balance is off because it's too quiet, right? It's too down. So they're better off holding that and going to work in an energetic environment where the energetic and the yin aspect are meeting them and they're quiet, right? They're balanced so they can focus better for them. Because they can focus better for them, then their language can get better in their head. Their physiology will match that and be able to move forward, and their threat bucket doesn't overflow for them. And their self-care, so to speak, and the learning of self becomes better, right? Because they've learned to self-manage their traits. But here's the thing. We need to understand ourselves and what those bound nature thoughts are from the beginning. How am I feeling? Where am I at? Like right now, me working at home is not a good environment for me. Not a good environment. Like I need to be somewhere where there's noise going on constantly. It just focuses me better. Some of the people I work with, they need this, right? They need more quiet, more one-on-one time with themselves. I'm not that way. I need to work in an environment because I recharge in an environment where I'm more to myself, or I'm with one person. But I've learned that over time. Like these aren't traits that, or the rebalancing is not something I learned in one day. These are things that I've learned as I've learned my language and understand where I work best in that environment. And it's a trial and error process as well. How does my physiology feel? And that goes from when we talk physiology, we're talking mental acuity, right? How tired I am, how energetic I am, how lethargic. We could get into the science of muscle physiology. Do I feel strong versus do I feel like I can't do anything? I feel like I can do it, but my body feels like it can't do it. That's a nervous system issue. Like and Margaret can talk really deep on this, a parasympathetic and a sympathetic environment. Where are you in that, right? Because that narrative is going to feed those areas of your body, right? So remember, when we come back, it's always going to start with the things that we talk about the most, your narrative and those bound nature traits in wherever they are. Like if you're someone who has a hard time going to the gym, you need to do it for yourself and for your health, but you can't go to the gym because it's an energy out, right? It's a drain. Then what can you do that's energy in to help? Like, is it more quiet? Is it paying for a class to make you go, right? So it's energy out, but the fact that you're paying for it, you're going to be around people and doing it with people, it makes you do it. Like, I don't need that, but some people do. And that's why people pay for that, right? Just as people pay for a life coach or people pay for a business coach, because there are certain things they know about themselves that they know they have to find a way to change the story in their head. And sometimes the accountability helps start changing that story. Comment, Mark? Shaking your head like, yeah.
Yeah, no. That's good. No, that's good. Yeah, all right, I'm not actually regressing. I'm not changing the subject, but I just have a question for everyone. How many people have had crazy dreams? Like crazy dreams. Do you know why you have crazy dreams? Because your subconsciousness is actually trying to process the emotional energy that's in your body. This comes back to what Chris was saying. This isn't a totally random thought. You will have because he was talking about your narratives, the emotional energy that's in your body that gets stuck there, by the way. It gets stuck in your body. If you don't fully process an experience emotionally, that emotional energy doesn't go away. It gets stuck there. So your body doesn't want it there, because this brings in a lot of the things that we've taught. One of the things we've taught is the importance of flow, right? We've taught but flow. So an emotional experience is, maybe I shared this. I feel like I shared this just the other day, but it may have been with this group. It may have been with a different group. It's like plucking a guitar string. It twangs and then it goes up and then the energy goes down. If you hijack that process, that energy gets stuck. So what ends up happening is you don't want it there. You're trying to get it to play itself out. So your narrative, this is why this is so important, because that emotional energy, the narrative may have actually, in the belief system attached to that narrative, may have created the emotional response. But if you don't fully process that emotional response, it will then drive the narrative. So if you've had crazy dreams, it is because there's emotional energy that your body is trying to create a narrative to match. It's trying to create a narrative that fits this ball of emotions that it's trying to process. This stack of papers, a stack of emotional papers. It's like, how do I make sense of all this? Let me create this crazy narrative. Because the narratives are there if you pay attention to them. This is why we get you to pay attention to them. The narratives are there to tell you what you're believing to be true. And then what you're believing to be true will actually determine your emotional response. And then the emotional response starts driving the narrative, and the narrative fuels the belief, and then the belief fuels the emotions. And then you've got this cycle. So you've got to hijack it somewhere. And so I'm back to what Chris was saying about narrative. That's why this is all, that's why all this ties in together. And then by the way, I need to put in my little circle your behaviors, because your behaviors create the experience, which then it's part of that cycle. And that's why we have you look at all four of them. So where do you want to go from here? Because I've got some thoughts.
Well, that's the fact that, with your actions and habits and behaviors, you remember they always back up to your perception of self. How you take in energy and out energy is also, you've learned that from your influence growing up, but you've taken it in a certain way. And the fact that you've taken it in a certain way, you've started to learn those certain actions and behaviors that, and Margaret is, and this is a great term that she uses, there's some generational aspects to how you handle things in your life that are handed down generationally. And if you look at your kids and how their narrative starts forming early, especially as I look at mine, and some of the traits that they have, the generational aspect of the family lineage, like especially if you have a lot of interaction with your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, you will see a lot of the same traits in everyone. And it's so learned as we go through. And that story, that narrative is so incredibly powerful on how those on how they interact with your physiology, but you will look in the lineage of your family, there will be a lot of family members that look the same generationally. Like I look exactly like my uncle, like exactly. My nephew looks exactly like me. My daughter looks exactly like my uncle's kids. I mean, physically.
Crazy.
I mean, it's a crazy thing, but here's the thing. The personality traits are so similar. Like my sister's son not only looks like me, he acts like me. This is freaky. When I started learning nutrition, I was a junior in high school. Do you know what he just did? He started studying nutrition on his own. I was freaked out when I heard this week. I sat down. I'm like, God, you are me. Like, it's crazy how these generational traits can come down and we take them in a certain way. And understanding yourself is not just you. It's looking at everyone that has come before you, that's come after you, and those that you don't even know came before you. So it's good to learn all the way down.
Yeah, it is. And I realized I never brought it back to your gym story, the part, or even the introvert extrovert part, because at some level, the reason you go to a gym class versus maybe working out on your own, or the reason you like sitting in a busy Starbucks to work versus a quiet study in your own house, or the reason you need these rhythms is because they're actually ways we process these emotions. They're emotion processing behaviors that we're doing. Like if you really just keep pulling on the string, that's what it is. Because again, back to the two people experiencing the same thing. Why is maybe one person can remain calm and the other isn't? It's because one person doesn't have an emotional attachment yet, a belief system about something that creates the emotional response that the other person does. So it gets back to what emotional energy is there that needs to be processed in that moment in time, and how have you learned? Because this is the other interesting thing. These things can be cultural, which of course makes sense. It gets back to what Chris was saying about even generational. That's a cultural thing as well. But we learn how to respond in different situations. We learn behaviors, we learn emotions, we learn responses. We have belief systems attached to things. So I need to create a graphic of this, because it's like I don't know, I just don't even know which came first. Did the story come first? And then there's a belief system attached to that story, and then there's an emotional response. There's behaviors. It's just this cycle. But that yin and yang, ebb and flow, however, if you want to draw it as an infinity sign, or if you want to just draw it like as sine waves, or however you want to do it, are there. Those rhythms are there. I personally believe, in my experience in doing some of this work, is they're there to actually help us process these emotions, because there are people who can. The goal, let me back up, because the goal in all of this work, we've talked about a free nature self versus bound nature self. The goal in all of this work is to be able to function in your free nature self. And I personally believe that a free nature person can be content, can be at peace in any situation. The craziest, loudest of parties, if they're thrown in the middle of that, they're going to stay themselves and they're going to be fine. They'll just flow in it. They can also be stuck in isolation, stuck in COVID quarantine by themselves for months on end, and actually be fine with it. So it's when you're not fine with it is when you want to pay attention. Like, what's going on? Why can't I do this? Or why am I doing this well? So you want to do some little self-exploration and try to figure out what's actually going on. And at some point, in order to take these bound nature parts that are being triggered or can't function, because we don't want to, what I was going to say was can't function in certain situations, we ought to be able to function in every situation, in theory, ideally. So if you're not able to function, then by all means, bring it back, rein it in, and get to those places where you are comfortable to create a sense of stability to do the work. But then you do the work, the 4-pillaring work, the stuff we've been teaching, so that when next time you're in one of those situations, you actually realize you can flow through it. Your cycles, if you've got a sine wave, of ups and downs, you actually want to have it flatten out a little bit, because you don't want to be tossed and turned. You want to be able to, again, flow. The key in all of this is flow, because emotions get stuck when you've judged them as good or bad, but bad typically, and you try to hijack the process. You stop the process of allowing them to flow. So if you judge something as bad, and that's going to be through your beliefs and your narratives, are going to judge an emotion. We've talked about all this, right? But it's in judging it that you shut it down, because we can do that. We're higher order beings. And so we've got this beautiful prefrontal cortex that stops the primal part of your brain, and stops things and sometimes there's a place for that. But then you stop the flow, you hijack the flow. But then it's like, what do I do with it? And then your body just stuffs it. This is back to we've talked about the stuffer versus the venter. You stuff that emotional energy in you, and then it will create those crazy dreams. If it can do it in the subconscious, it can do it in your consciousness. It'll create these crazy scenarios. And then the cycle just keeps continuing. So we've been teaching you to change your narrative. How do you hijack the cycle? You can hijack it anywhere along the way. You can hijack it with your narrative. You can hijack it by changing beliefs. You can hijack it by changing your behaviors. But I found you get the most bang for your buck if you can, only because it's sort of like if you've ever had a weighted system, like the emotional energy just is weighted a little more heavily, or you can hijack it by getting rid of that emotional energy. So you can hijack this cycle anyway, from any angle, but today's talk is about trying to hijack it from this emotional place, being aware of the emotional energy that's there, your emotional responses, and then how do you dissipate it? How do you get rid of it?
I think, it's how, the question is how, for those of you listening, like, well, how do I know my actions or behaviors? What are they? Okay. Especially, I'm bringing this up because a lot of the stuff that we do over and over and over again, we've done it for so long, we think it's just us, but we don't realize that we're living in that bound nature state for so long, and that these avoidance behaviors or these coping mechanisms we consider part of us is that bound nature state. Okay, so let me just throw these out there, and maybe if you have a pen and paper, you can just write down things you do all the time. Okay, let me give you an example. Someone that feels like they have to stay in all weekend all the time. All right. You may say that you're introverted and that just helps you recover. Totally get it. But there are other ways that introverts recover. Okay. So you get into a habit that could be non-serving. Okay. Someone that says, I have to run all the time to get rid of my stress. Okay. I agree. But every day? Like every day, or you're just an emotional wreck? Someone that has to exercise balls to the wall every single time they work out, or they feel like they didn't do anything. You might say to that person, wow, man, they're a hard worker. I would say, something going on there. Something going on there. Why? Why do I have to do that? Someone who has to exercise even when they're on vacation with the family, the family has to wait because they got to work out in the morning. Like, yes, you want to, but when you're putting it at the expense of others and yourself all the time, what does that mean? I'm not saying it's right. I'm just asking you to ask yourself, what does that mean? Someone who's extroverted has to be with someone every night, a friends or something, or on the weekend have to have 8 play dates or 20 play dates. That just seems a little off, that it's so excessive, right? I always have to have sweets at night. That's a big one for people, okay? I would say something's off. Physiology, right? If it's food related, the narrative is definitely driving the physiology of food, okay? I mean, there's so many, it's actually an infinite statement.
Yeah.
Because it's about you. Like, what are you doing every day that just seems like it's so repetitive and part of your day that if you didn't do it, it would actually probably break up your rhythm of the day. Okay? One of the ones I used to do, I had to read the paper every day or I felt off and have coffee at the same time. I remember when I couldn't do it, how just off I was. And I figured that I needed that downtime so much in the morning because my life was so over the top all the time, like I could never recover enough. And like that was the only time I could find to recover. So if I look back, I had to make a lot of changes. Or here's one, if I start getting anxiety and stress that I'm not getting enough done with my children are around, that is a huge indicator that my scheduling and I'm getting into overwhelm, right? I'm yelling at them. I usually don't, right? That's a huge indicator. So you have to really break it down for yourself. You know, are you someone that wakes up in the morning and you're just stressed constantly because you got like 90 things that you have to get done? And then at the expense of everything else because you haven't programmed well enough or you haven't scheduled yourself well enough.
Yeah.
How do you feel now in isolation when you're at home all the time? What are you constantly thinking about? Like, what are your thoughts? Like, what is the one thing that's stressing you out more than anything? You know?
And a quick a tool or a technique that I use all the time with that is once you've identified those behaviors or those thoughts or whatever they are, let's say you talked about needing to read the paper every morning. We'll just use that one since he brought it up. If you find that for yourself, whatever that is for you, or feel like you have to go for a run or whatever, be aware of it. Actually stop the process. Recognize that you're probably created that behavior or that habit because there's emotional energy you're trying to run away from. There's something, and it may not have even been you. Chris talked about things even being generational. We can pick up some of these habits generationally. But what I do is just push pause on the experience, push pause on the behavior, and just be still. So I'm back to that guitar string being plucked. Can you sit with the opposite? Like if you want to eat that piece of chocolate at night or whatever it is, sit there and don't eat it. You know, when you're ready to go for the run, actually don't go for a run. Sit on your chair instead. Or if you want to go read the paper, fold it up, put it away, and just sit. Close your eyes if you have to. But be still. Sit silently, quietly with yourself. And then notice, what are you feeling? And then here's the key. To the best of your ability, allow yourself to feel it. I mean, just sit and say, okay, and I'll even talk to my body. I'll say, okay, I feel like, let's say it's going for a run. Okay, I'm feeling a lot of stress right now. I feel like I'm supposed to go for a run. You know, what is it that I'm feeling? Like, what is this that's driving this? And so I'll ask my body to tell me. I'm back to y'all heard me say this before. I see you. I hear you. I just cracked my knuckle. Did y'all hear that? I see you. I hear you. I'm glad to be with you, and I can do something about it. Those 4 questions. So I'm okay, body. I see that you want to go for a run, that this is the scenario right now. Tell me. I want to hear what's going on. Talk to me. I'm glad to be with you, meaning I'm not going to judge what comes up. I'm going to sit with it. I'm not going to call it bad. we haven't gotten into the physiology or the science of that. That's your amygdala telling you something is bad or scary or good. And then what can I do about it? I can actually be present with it. And I can allow that guitar string to play all the way out. I can allow my body. Your body is an instrument, which is actually a beautiful way to look at it. It's really an instrument that's getting plucked all the time. And it's supposed to be playing a beautiful noise, but it's not, because we've hijacked all these strings. We won't let certain ones play because we've judged them as bad. So we won't let them play. This is an opportunity to let go of our grip on that, let go of the judgment of it, and allow it to play. So sit with that, ask your body, what are you feeling? And guess what? You may feel something physical. You may feel something emotional. You may, by the way, this is the principle of meditation. This is why people meditate, because it's a huge, it's, in my opinion, it's a non-negotiable, to spend a little bit of time every day, just letting your body express what's in there. Or a thought's going to come into your head. So you're either going to get words coming into your head, maybe an image coming into your head. It's going to be trying to express whatever it is that was the driver behind your behavior, behind this. So my little tidbit, because I always like to leave you guys, if I can, with tools that you can take home and practice on your own. But to sit still, the next time you want to be in a busy Starbucks, or the next time you want to avoid the busy Starbucks and stay home, because that's option number 2. I'll get to that in a minute. If you're one that needs to be doing all the time, then that answer is to sit, because there's probably emotional energy that needs to come up and out. Okay. Then exercise number 2 is actually the exact opposite of that. And that is, if you find yourself just always wanting to be by yourself, always wanting to be, just still, move. Again, this is about flow, right? Because there could be 2 things you can, well, I'll get into that later, but you don't want stagnation. You want things to be moving. Mm-hmm. So I'll share a funny story later, but I'll stop before I do and let Chris chime in. But that's where, if you want to be still, that's where, do go for a run. That's why we're not saying running is not bad or good. Being still is not bad or good. It just is what it is. It's what's needed in the moment. Right. So anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about interrupting your patterns. I think I shared this story, maybe not here, but I worked with a heart surgeon for nutrition. And believe it or not, that heart surgeon went to Burger King every day at lunch and got 2 Whoppers. A heart surgeon. And he was overweight, had every symptom of the people that he worked with. So you talk about being in your environment and the becoming your environment. Do you know what I mean? And he had done that for 15 years. Every day, 2 Whoppers at lunch. From work, drove, came back. Same place, same road, everything. And he knew, obviously, that what was going on. So all I did is what Margaret actually said. Told him to, next time you go, just pull over on the side of the road. Just ask why you're going. That's all you have to do. Pulled over on the side of the road. Never had another Whopper. Now, was it brilliant coaching? Maybe. I only coached him for 3 weeks instead of 12 weeks because I solved this problem pretty quick. But the point is, he interrupted his pattern, right? Like if you're in a rut with certain things, we've talked about changing your route to work. Like go a different way. It forces your brain to think completely different. When you're in a pattern that you go here all the time, you go to this place all the time, and then this place, you're actually on autopilot. So your subconscious is running you. When you change your pattern, you shut that down, you go to your conscious brain, then you start the reprogramming aspect. That's why it's a beautiful statement to just stop. Do something completely different. She said a great point. If you're someone that feels like you have to sit all the time, get up and move, because that's probably what you need. If you're moving all the time, Sit down and shut up, right? Let's take a break. Like, what are you trying to hide? If you're trying to hide something because you're moving all the time, maybe you can work through that. Vice versa. If you're sitting all the time, you're probably thinking too much. Let's stop thinking and go do something. So there's a lot of energetic revival, if we want to use that word, to pattern interruption. Because remember, when we teach the 4 stages of learning in the brain, the whole point of stage 3 to stage 4 is pattern interruption of yourself from the emotional bound nature trait that's coming out.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're doing when we're trying to change the emotion and physical state of yourself. Pattern interruption every time.
And when you start, that's the hardest part is taking that first step. That hardest part is making the decision and then actually following through with whatever that interruption may be. So can I tell you all a funny story? At least I think.
Yeah.
Because the pattern interruption isn't just behaviors, right? We're talking about emotions as well. So I was just a stuffer of stuff. And this is about flow. It's about getting things moving. It's things that have been stuck that we want to get moving. And so was it 3 years ago when Wonder Woman came out? I think it was 3 years ago. I just fell in love with the actress. I thought she was beautiful. I just thought she was just adorable. I just loved her. So I watched all these interviews with her. Is it Gal Gadot? Is that her name? Gal Gadot? Anyway. And there was one, and she's with the director of the movie. I've forgotten her name. There was 2 women. Like, that was part of a big deal at the time. I've forgotten her name. But anyway, there was an interview with the 2 of them. And someone asked them, well, what is your favorite curse word? I thought, well, that's an interesting question to ask. Well, without missing a beat, they both are like, oh, well, that's easy. It's fuck. And they just were like, because there's so many ways you can say it. You can say it, hi, fuck, just all these different ways. You can say it with intention and all this. Okay, I grew up in the South. I grew up with a mother who literally had her mouth washed out with soap when she was growing up. Like, literally. That never happened to me, but that's the mom I grew up with. So we didn't say words like that growing up. And anyway, what I realized is I just loved the freedom that these 2 women had in just spewing out expletives. So I just was like, you know what? Go for it. So I just started saying shit, damn, fuck, blah, 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 much to the chagrin of my family. They were like, you can't, please don't do this in public. There was like a 3-week period where I called them letting my F-bombs fly, letting my fucks fly. And I intentionally tried to say them every which way. And here's the deal. That word, it's just 4 letters. It's just a word. It really, there's nothing to those 4 letters, with one exception. For some of us, like, we were taught, now the generation coming up next wasn't taught this, but some of us were taught these words are bad because they actually have an emotional response attached to them. There are emotions attached to them. So it's sort of like the emotion is here, and I'm by not expressing these, it's a beautiful way of getting that stuff out, right? It can be a beautiful way. You don't want to direct it at someone. But so I drove up and down. My family didn't want to hear it in the house anymore. Mom just all of a sudden got gutter mouth, but I did, and it felt awesome. So I took it to my car. I would drive up and down the interstate, up and down 66, just screaming as many expletives as I had. A lifetime of fucks and shits and damns and stuff stored up in me that I just had to get out. So I literally spent 3 weeks getting the flow going of these emotions. We talked about the water pump the other day. It was stuck. It was stagnant. These were the plucked strings that I didn't allow to play. So using that technique, I got it out. It only took about 3 weeks. And finally I realized, and it started off slow. And then a lot of anger, resentment, bitterness and stuff was attached. And then guess what? It waned. And after about 3 weeks, I realized, I don't need to say this anymore. It's gone. Like, whatever was there was gone. And what I realized after that too, is I reached another level of emotional self-control. I'll just put it that way. I found a lot of my triggers were gone after that. My physiology improved. My immune system improved. This is no small thing, but it was a lifetime of judging these things as bad. So it was suppressed, but then it took disrupting the pattern of stuffing, getting this stuff out, getting the flow going, and then it's gone. So that's, you can clear out backlogs this way too, not just in the moment, but you can go back and clear up lifetime or even generational stuff from doing some of this work. So that's my story.
That's a great story. That's a really great story. But you know, when to get back to the how, you know, I think if we had to review what we've talked about here a little bit, and Margaret can give her a little review. To me, the one thing that sticks out is you have to do almost like a self, what was the word I'm looking for? Like a daily review of the things that you do all the time, to really start pinpointing and checking out the behaviors you do, and then start diving into the emotion behind why. Right? So you have to find, it's a backwards way of learn your language in a way, but it's also a different way, right? It forces you to think a little creatively, but to look at all the things that you possibly do in a day. Like, for instance, you set time to do work, but every time you start doing work, you go to your email, then from your email, you go right to Facebook. Like, what's the pattern? Mm-hmm. Like, you can start doing what we call a daily TikTok, and for 2 to 3 days, you write down what you're doing every hour. Like, and that'll start pointing some stuff out for you. So today, if you got up at 7, you know, you brushed your teeth, had breakfast, you left for work at 8, you took your time, got to work, and at 9 to 10, you write down what you did from 10 to 11. And what can happen is you can start to see little patterns already in your day that you don't even notice. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's going to be my one big thing for today, for you guys to think of and work on, because you need to point those things out to yourself, and tell yourself that. What about you, Margaret?
No, I think that's great. I mean, we're just variations on the same theme, which is self-awareness, non-judgment, flow, you know, and then I guess we introduced pattern interruption. I mean, we had talked about it before, but I don't think we'd ever given it that title before, which is huge. And then pay attention to those things as well that you're not doing. Not just what you are doing, but what are you avoiding doing? Yep, because that gets back to, do you need to sit still with something, or do you need to actually engage something new that you wouldn't normally do? If parties are difficult for you, go to a party. You know, if loud places are difficult, go there. No, I mean, know your limitations. It may be, I'll just give you another example from my own life. For the last month, I've been taking ice baths, and oh my gosh, I'll tell you there's a science behind why I'm doing it. It actually has to do with learning to process emotions. But I'm intentionally putting myself in an uncomfortable situation so that I'm retraining myself to not be afraid, not to fear. Because let me tell you, when I first started, I thought I was going to die. My heart's racing. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm literally intentionally putting myself into a fight or flight scenario, but I'm doing it while staying in my core state, my true nature state, so that I can actually retrain those parts of me that have been stuck in fight or flight to say, okay, this isn't going to kill you. You're actually going to be okay here. And guess what? A month into it, it's just a lot easier. I mean, there are other benefits of ice baths too, but that's one of them, is actually you're retraining we didn't really talk about this, but there's different parts of your brain that are responsible for these responses. And the fight flight is one of the primary drivers behind it is your amygdala. Some people call it your guard shack. It's the part of your brain that assesses the situation and it says, okay, this is good, this is scary, this is bad, and so it's going to determine whether you stay in rest and digest or whether you move into fight or flight. And so it's retraining. It's giving you, I'm intentionally creating experiences so I can retrain, create a new narrative, new belief system, new emotional response, which will then be a new physiology. So it's all connected. Who knows? Next month it might be something different, but it's, there's different people, different seasons, different areas to work on. But anyway, I'll stop with that story.
That was good. So, any questions?
Margaret.
Yes.
In response to your story about letting the F-bomb fly,
yeah.
Coming from someone who learning English as a second language, I actually don't have that emotional attachment to the, as in like learning it when I first learned it, it just feels like just another word in like the English language. It doesn't feel like a bad thing to say it.
Exactly. That's an excellent point, because that's exactly right. It's just a word. It's just a word until you've attached emotional meaning to it. Mm-hmm. And the culture I grew up with, it was people had judged the emotion as bad. So you're not free to express it. And so when people, they found ways to express it, but yeah, that's why this younger generation, like my daughter and her friends, oh my gosh, because there's a difference between, how do I word this? There's a difference between, in my culture, it was considered, profanity, or it was considered like it's targeted at someone else versus just expression. And anyway, but yeah, there's a whole nother story there. I think that's also what got me kicked out of my community. I wrote an article called "Let Your Fucks Fly," and I sent it to a Christian audience, and it didn't go over so well. So, oh well. But I truly meant it. Like, it was meant to be a beautiful thing. Like, hey guys, learn how to express yourself. And anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, because I was about to ask whether or not it has something to do with religion.
Oh, I think definitely, because religion is culture, religion is belief systems. So absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And there's ritual in there, there's behaviors in there. Religion has all of it. It's got the narrative, it's got the beliefs, it's got the behaviors, it's got what's deemed an acceptable emotional response. It's got all of it, which is why they're so powerful, right? Because it encompasses everything. You've got your stuff for your body, stuff for your soul, and stuff for your spirit, all in one place. And that's why this younger generation can just say these words, because there's no attachment to it. There's no, it's just a word, a way to express themselves. But that's fascinating, Han. Of course that would be the case, But I have learned, and there is a place, I believe, to honor and respect those who you're with. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm around my parents, I don't do that. Mm-hmm. Because that really bothers them. And so if I want to be provocative, maybe I will, but usually I don't. I'm trying to say, okay, this is their generation, their culture. It's what they learned. Mm-hmm. And, unless they want to learn something else, there's a place to respect that and to say, okay, I won't. But then the key is, if you're really mad, find a time to express it. You don't want to stuff it. You don't want to stuff it.
Exactly. It's more about, not censoring yourself. Mm-hmm. If you feel like you have a need to let it out, and absolutely, please do.
Yeah. Because that's actually, I talked about honoring other people, because that's actually honoring you. Because there's a part of you that, let's say, is really pissed off. Like, to not acknowledge that, it's back to, I see you, I hear you, I'm glad to be with you, I can do something about it. You're basically not honoring that part of you. So at some point you need to honor that and acknowledge it. And again, let that, you're an instrument. That part of you's been plucked, let it play. Let it play. Don't shut it down. And that brings us back to the very beginning when Chris talked about the need for balance, the ups and the downs, you know. Let it all flow. Let it happen. Henry, you were on a call with me yesterday. We talked about this yesterday. Just let it flow. Let it keep going. Mm-hmm. You know, don't shut it down, because you're an instrument, and it's going to play music. It may be a little out of tune right now, but it's only out of tune because we've shut it down. So get it going again, and then it's going to play beautiful music. And that's what we want to hear. That's what we're going for.
I think that's a beautiful analogy, Margaret.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? All right. Well, listen, we'll be here Wednesday at 11. Correct? Yeah. Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. All right.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.